It's crazy to think about the fact that Saints Row has been around for 13 years now. We've had 4 mainline entries and only 2 cities to explore. Well, unless you count Hell. But anyway, this is because Volition likes to reuse maps. Now, it's not inherently a bad thing in my opinion that they like to reuse assets. There's pros and cons to it, and that aspect of this isn't ultimately what I want to focus on. Instead, I would like to see how Stillwater has changed over the years. That means comparing certain hotspots and notable locations from the maps of Saints Row 1 and Saints Row 2, because ultimately they share the same city, it's just been heavily redesigned. I'll also be including the map from Saints Row Undercover, thanks to F13 in the Saints Row Discord for that idea. I originally didn't even think of that, but it was a good idea, and unfortunately for Saints Row Undercover, I can only include screenshots. I can barely get that thing to run on my piece of shit computer, let alone record it at the same time, so bear with me on that. Also, keep in mind that Saints Row Undercover doesn't have the entire map of Stillwater, so I can't include it for every single example I have here. So I thought a good place to start would be the Saints Row Loft from Saints Row 1. It's the first crib you get in the game. It's the first crib you get in the series, actually. It's just a little ghetto house with a little garage next to it. It looks kind of nice. It's the one that I always load at in my Saints Row 1 save. So I can definitively say that the row in Saints Row 2 is completely different from how it is in Saints Row 1. The road layout is even completely different, so it was really hard to pinpoint exactly where this building is supposed to be. My guess is around right here. The only problem I have with this guess is that the church looks a lot closer to the actual building location than it should be in Saints Row 1. But other than that, obviously you can tell the area looks completely different. The building is no longer there, and we'll get to that church later. Another notable building from Saints Row 1 would be King's Penthouse. Eventually it becomes your crib, and in Saints Row 2 it really doesn't look all too different. You can tell that they didn't change much for this. You can tell it's the same building. I think it has a different name. The area around it looks pretty much the same. It's not all too different. So another notable building from Saints Row 1 is the Price Mansion. Just like Ben's penthouse, this eventually becomes your crib, and it looks pretty much the same in Saints Row 2. You can tell the textures might be a little different, but overall everything looks basically in order, except for the sign. There's a sign that says Price Estate in Saints Row 2. It wasn't there in Saints Row 1. Last time I checked, at the end of Saints Row 1, that was your house, so maybe somebody came back and bought it while you were in a coma. I don't know. So here's the first crib you get in Saints Row 2. It's the Redlight Loft. It's a piece of shit little house, and it looks like garbage. And it's basically useless too, because it's right next to the Saints hideout. But anyway, here it is in Saints Row 1. It's a completely different building. And there's not a definitive canonical answer as to how far along Saints Row 2 is after 1. People's guesses are about 5 years or so. I think I probably agree with that, but it's a completely different building. And here it is in Saints Row Undercover, yet again, a completely different building. That's 3 different buildings in the same spot over the course of what can't be longer than like 6 years. So speaking of the Saints hideout, here it is right here in Saints Row 2. It's got Purgatory written on it. Looks nice. Well, it looks as nice as it can. It's Mission House, I think is what it's called in Saints Row 2. It's like a biblical building type thing. And in Saints Row 1, there's a little like barricade covering the thing. There's no doors on the building. There's no trace of it actually being a mission house or anything at all. We really don't know what the building is. It looks really different. And in Saints Row Undercover, it looks like shit. There's a mangled floating car next to it, and I don't know. Here's a good one. This is the Altor Dome in Saints Row 1, and you know, it looks like pretty much how it's gonna look like. It really doesn't change that much. I was kind of surprised at how faithful they've stayed with this Altor Dome, especially since like buildings for sports in real life often do get renovated and replaced and stuff like that. But here's in Saints Row 2, basically looks the same. The Altor logo is different, but it really does look very similar. And even in Saints Row Undercover, it's damn similar. I mean, it's downgraded in graphics, obviously, but they got most of the details on there pretty well, especially since the game wasn't even finished. Like, they did a pretty damn good job at recreating the Altor Dome. So one thing I noticed, there's a big ass hotel in Saints Row 2 next to the Altor Dome called the Hampton Hotel. And in Saints Row Undercover, that building is there, but they call it the Hampton, like the Hampton Inn, like the real chain of hotels. So if that got released like that, they might have got in some trouble. So in Saints Row 2, they not only redesigned the map of Saints Row 1, but they also expanded upon it. So like there's cutoffs on Saints Row 1 with like mountains or whatever that aren't there in Saints Row 2, and they're replaced with like actual places that you can go to. And here's like a nice little neighborhood in Saints Row 2. It's called New Hanakit, I don't know, Hennessy, whatever. And in Saints Row 1, it's replaced with like, there, you can see a little bit of a neighborhood, but like behind it, you can definitely tell that there's like hills up there. I don't know how Altor managed to like cut hills and make like flat land. I don't know much about changing the earth, but yeah, they did that. So here's a little comparison of Chinatown in Saints Row 1, Saints Row 2, and Saints Row Undercover. They're really not all that different. What I really like about Saints Row Undercover is that the layout of the map that is there, they obviously cut out portions of the map. They cut out the whole top island, but the map that is there is generally like pretty much the same thing with just less detail. So here's the University Loft from Saints Row 2. It's probably my favorite crib in the game. I don't really know why, I just like how it looks. And here it is in Saints Row Undercover. All the detail is gone. It's basically just a texture on a building model now. But anyway, the reason that I bring up this building is because in Saints Row Undercover, there were originally supposed to be interiors for cribs that you could customize. And the only one that's in the unfinished version of Saints Row Undercover is this building right here. You can see that they heavily used the interior from the University Loft for the interior for this Saints Row Undercover crib. So here is Stillwater University. This is one of the areas that is in Saints Row 2 and not in the first game, but it is in Saints Row Undercover, and you can see some back-to-back shots here. The detail obviously is night and day, but for the most part, with the exception of the big-ass statue, everything is basically where it's supposed to be. On a side note, how the hell did Volition manage to get a college campus approved for a Saints Row game? So this is Gat and Aisha's house from Saints Row 2 in Stillwater. It's just a normal looking house. It's in a nice neighborhood. It's right like down the street from Price's mansion. And here it is in Saints Row 1. It's more or less the same. It's really not all that different. The building itself, at least. All right, so the grand finale, the place that started off the entire series, the church in Saints Row. In Saints Row 1, it's their little HQ. It's where the Saints hang out. It's where you're canonized. It's in the middle of the ghetto, and it looks like shit. Now, in Saints Row 2, Altor comes in and renovates the entire row. They clean up the ghetto, they change all the buildings, they put their giant HQ behind the church, which is now cleaned up. They even changed the road layout. They made the row look as unrecognizable as possible. Now, in Saints Row Undercover, Altor's changes are more or less the same, but in the story of this game, Altor is on its way out, so their giant building is being renovated, and the church, for some reason, is just completely gone. There's no traces of the church ever being there. It's just gone. Now, this is one of the only areas of Stillwater that was remade for a released game after 2. You can see the church is in Saints Row 4. The church itself looks the same. It's pretty damn faithful, but the area around the church is obviously different, and I really don't expect it to be the same because it's just a closed off little area. You can't even go there after this one mission, but needless to say, it looks completely different. So there you go. There's just a few spots from Stillwater compared over the years. Obviously, there is always room for a part 2. Stillwater is a huge city, but for now, I hope you enjoyed it.